The somewhat inaccurately named Egypt Medal was issued to all personnel of the British Army and Navy for their service in the Anglo-Egyptian War of 1882, but far more extensively for actions undertaken in neighbouring Sudan as part of the Mahdist War from 1884 until 1889. You might have noticed that I said personnel rather than men, and that is because at long last this is the first time in British medal history that the services of women were officially recognised with a military medal. 17 nurses received this medal without the clasp for their services in 1882 at Alexandria, Ismailia, and in the hospital ship Carthage. The initial cause of the Anglo-Egyptian War was largely economic. The newly completed Suez Canal had been hideously expensive to build, and as a result the country was mired in debt. Both the British and French had huge economic investment in the canal, most notably the British Prime Minister, William Gladstone, and were anxious to protect these investments. So, when in 1881 an Egyptian army officer, Ahmad Urabi, mutinied and initiated a coup against the Khedive of Egypt, Tewfik Pasha, because of grievances in pay, the British and French governments sent a joint note to the Egyptian government declaring their support. Both countries backed up the support with firepower, and on the 20th of May, British and French warships arrived off the coast of Alexandria. On the 11th of June, an anti-Christian riot occurred in Alexandria that killed 50 Europeans. Colonel Urabi ordered his forces to put down the riot, but Europeans fled the city and Urabi's army began fortifying the town. The British, under the command of Admiral Beauchamp Seymour, demanded that the military build-up stop, but the ultimatum was rejected, and British warships began a bombardment of Alexandria on the 11th of July. The French, having sent ships to the area, did what they do best and withdrew. Alexandria was guarded by 11 fortresses. At 7 a.m. Seymour signalled to HMS Alexandra to commence firing at the Ras el Tin fortifications, followed by a general order to the fleet to attack the enemy's batteries. The fort battery was able to return fire and score hits, particularly on Alexandra, but by 12:30 the fort's guns had been silenced. The fleet, consisting of 8 battleships and a number of smaller gunboats, engaged the forts at both long range and, where necessary, closer inshore. HMS Condor sailed within 400 metres of Fort Marabout to fire at it furiously. One by one the Egyptian forts were silenced, until at 5:15 the general order to cease fire was issued. The Egyptians, both outmanned and outgunned, had used their firepower to good effect, but the outcome of the bombardment had never been in doubt. The next day, reconnaissance discovered that the hospital battery had rebuilt its defences. At 10 a.m, HMS's Temeraire and Inflexible opened fire, and the battery raised the white flag 20 minutes later. Very soon, an Egyptian boat was sent out to the flagship bearing a flag of truce, and a ceasefire was ordered. But negotiations failed, and the bombardment was ordered to resume. With the British fleet running low on ammunition, an irregular bombardment of forts recommenced. It has been estimated that as many as 30% of the shells fired by the Royal Navy missed their target and landed in the city itself, causing death and injury amongst its inhabitants, damaging or destroying many buildings, and starting fires which spread over the following days. Seymour, unsure of the situation, didn't immediately land any troops to take control of the city or fight the fires. It was not until the 14th of July that British Marines and sailors landed in Alexandria. The British lost 6 killed and 27 wounded, the Egyptians unknown, but estimated to be around 500 killed and injured. With the Navy and Royal Marines in charge of the city, the rebels were forced to withdraw towards Cairo, and now it became an army problem. And in August, a British army of over 40,000, commanded by Garnet Wolseley, invaded the Suez Canal zone. His orders were to destroy Urabi's forces and clear the country of all other rebels. The two forces met at Tel Kabir, 110 kilometres north-northeast of Cairo, on September the 13th, 1882. Urabi's defences were hastily prepared, but included trenches and redoubts. He also had 60 pieces of artillery and breech-loading rifles. Wolseley began his advance from the canal on the night of the 12th of September with 13,000 men and 60 guns. By 5:45 a.m, Wolseley's troops were just 600 yards from the entrenchments, and dawn was just breaking. Surprise was not achieved. The Egyptian sentries saw them and started to fire. The first shots were followed by multiple volleys from the entrenchments and by the artillery. British troops, led by the Highland Brigade on the left flank and the 2nd Brigade on the right flank, with the Guards Brigade in support, charged with the bayonet. Arriving at the trenches all at the same time, all the way along the line, the resulting battle was over within an hour. Several groups stood and fought, mainly the Sudanese troops in front of the Highland Brigade, but those not overwhelmed in the first rush were forced to retreat. In the end, it was a crushing defeat for the Egyptians. 57 British troops were killed, over 2,000 Egyptians died. The British army had more casualties due to heat stroke than enemy action. With the rebels defeated, power was restored to the Khedive. The war was at an end, and the majority of the British army returned to Alexandria and took ships for home, leaving just an army of occupation. With the governance of Egypt now passing largely under British control, Europeans became increasingly aware of troubles in neighbouring Sudan. Sudan had been governed by an Egyptian administration since 1819, but because of the heavy taxes it imposed and the bloody start of the Egyptian rule in Sudan, and, crucially, the lax religious standards and willingness to appoint non-Muslims to high positions, this colonial system was resented by the Sudanese people. In the 1870s, a Muslim cleric named Muhammad Ahmed preached renewal of the faith and liberation of the land and began attracting followers. Soon, in open revolt against the Egyptians, Muhammad Ahmed proclaimed himself the Mahdi, the promised redeemer of the Islamic world. With Egypt's financial position not improving, it was decided that, in order to save the treasury large sums of money, to withdraw all Egyptian troops from the country and let Sudan govern itself. With the country in revolt and many of the Egyptian garrisons under siege, this was not as easy as it sounded. Even if the withdrawal was what the Mahdi's rebels wanted, it was feared that if done without organised protection, the garrisons would be attacked as they retreated. The Egyptian government asked for a British officer to be sent to the Sudan to coordinate the withdrawal of the garrisons. It was hoped that the Mahdi's forces would judge an attack on a British subject to be too great a risk and allow the withdrawal to proceed without incident. The officer chosen for the task was General Charles Gordon, and he arrived in Khartoum on the 18th of February 1884. But instead of organising the evacuation of the garrisons, he set about administering the city and made tentative moves to strengthen the hold of the Anglo-Egyptian administration in Sudan. After he requested and was refused additional troops to assist him in the defeat of the Mahdists, the British still intent on evacuation, and the Mahdists closing in, Gordon finally ordered the strengthening of the fortifications around Khartoum. The city was besieged by mid-March. Gordon, his staff, and 7,000 Egyptian soldiers were cut off. He had food for 6 months and plenty of ammunition, but it was clear that he could no longer withdraw without help. The relief column sent to rescue Gordon, known as the Nile Expedition, was belatedly dispatched from Wadi Halfa in late October. Split into two, a smaller desert column of 2,400 men was sent by camel overland. The larger main force of 3,000 men boarded a flotilla of rivercraft and made its way up the Nile River towards Khartoum. The desert column, commanded by Sir Herbert Stewart, reached Abu Klea late on the 16th of January 1885, where they found a Mahdist force of 12,000 Sudanese fighters. Stewart decided not to attack that night. At first light, Stewart ordered his force to form square while under fire from enemy snipers. The square moved slowly forwards towards the Sudanese position over very rocky, difficult ground. Suddenly, the square was ambushed by a huge Mahdist force that had been hidden from view. Despite suffering heavy losses to British rifle fire, the Mahdists succeeded in penetrating a British square, which was closed only after desperate hand-to-hand fighting. The British suffered 168 casualties, the Mahdists about 1,100. The river column, commanded by Major General William Earl, moved slower, hampered by all the difficult cataracts of the Nile, as they moved south. On the 10th of February, they reached Kirbekan, where it had been reported a force of Mahdists were camped. Earl took 1,000 of his men and stormed the heights where 9,000 Sudanese waited, and totally routed them. The British lost 60, among whom was General William Earl, killed. In the event, neither column reached Gordon in Khartoum in time. On the 26th of January 1885, Khartoum fell to the Mahdist army of 50,000 men. The entire garrison was slaughtered, including General Gordon, his body beheaded. 2 days later, 2 British armed steamers towing several native boats carrying 140 troops, an advance guard of the river column, came within sight of the city. Once there, they found the Egyptian flag was missing from Gordon's palace, and they were fired upon from the town. They were too late. Brigadier General Charles Wilson, the on-scene commander, ordered his flotilla to turn around and steam back down the river to Wolseley. It was the closest the relief column would ever get to Khartoum. Other operations in Sudan included 2 expeditions to Suakin, a port city in northeastern Sudan on the west coast of the Red Sea, with the intention of destroying the power of the Sudanese military commander Osman Digna. Both expeditions were led by Major General Sir Gerald Graham, who had earned himself a VC in the Crimea. The first was in February 1884 and led to several notable British victories, among them the Second Battle of El Teb, in which the British suffered only light casualties, and the Battle of Tamai, where the British suffered more losses than in any other battle of the Mahdist War, 214 soldiers being killed or wounded, neither of which achieved much militarily, and Graham's force was withdrawn from Sudan shortly afterwards. Following the fall of Khartoum, Graham led a second expedition in March 1885. A week after its arrival in Suakin, the expedition fought 2 actions, a minor skirmish at the Battle of Hashkin on the 20th of March, and 2 days later the much more serious Battle of Tofrek, where the British, who were camped in an improvised stockade made from thorn bushes and sandbags, were attacked mid-afternoon by a small force of about 2,000 Mahdist soldiers. The engagement lasted no more than 25 minutes. By 4:15 the Sudanese withdrew, leaving large numbers of their dead and wounded behind. It is estimated that over 1,000 Mahdists died. The British lost just over 200 killed and wounded. 2 months later, the Gladstone government decided to abandon its military campaign in Sudan, and while General Graham and his force were evacuated from the port city on the 17th of May 1885, the British maintained a garrison in the port. 3 years later, the Battle of Gemisa took place, when this garrison was threatened, again by Osman Digna, who had plans to besiege it. General Francis Grenfell launched a sortie against the Mahdists, and after 1.5 hours of fighting, the casualties were 12 on the Anglo-Egyptian side and over 1,000 on the Mahdist. After this, the Mahdists withdrew, removing any future threat to Suakin. The final action, for which the Egypt Medal was awarded, did in fact take place in Egypt. While the Anglo-Egyptians were aiming to leave Sudan, the Sudanese, on the other hand, had ambitions of spreading their Mahdist faith into Egypt. In 1889, the Khalifa, Abdallah bin Mohammed, sent an army of 6,000 strong into Egypt for this purpose. They camped at Toski by the Nile, 76 kilometres north of the Egyptian-Sudan border. Here they were attacked by an Egyptian army under British control, who very nearly annihilated the entire Sudanese force. After a 5-hour fight, only 800 Mahdist warriors escaped, effectively ending the Mahdist threat to Egypt. The medal for service in Egypt and Sudan between 1882 and 1889 was instituted in October 1882, shortly after the actions at Alexandria and Tel Kabir. It was later extended to include the subsequent battles in Sudan and Toski. Because of this, there are 2 different designs for the reverse of the medal. The obverse, designed by Leonard Wyon, shows a veiled head of Queen Victoria, with the Latin legend Victoria Regina et Imperatrix, Victoria, Queen and Empress, around the edge. The reverse, a rather plain, uninspiring design by John Pinches, features the Sphinx on a pedestal with the word Egypt above and the year 1882 in the exergue below, and it is with this date that we find the difference in design. Medals awarded to all those who took part in the initial bombardment of Alexandria or the Battle of Tel Kabir in 1882 received this design, with any additional clasps earned. Any medal awarded from 1884 on did not have the date in the exergue, receiving an even plainer medal with clasps earned. The medal disc, which is made from fine silver, is 36 mm in diameter and suspended from its ribbon by a straight silver swivelling suspender. The ribbon, which is 32 mm wide, has 3 blue and 2 white stripes of equal width. The recipient's name, rank, name and regiment are engraved on the edge. In the case of the Navy, the ship's name replaces the regiment. Medals awarded to Egyptian troops are named in Arabic. A total of 13 clasps were awarded, but the most any one man earned was 7, and only one of those, to a Captain John Beach of the 20th Hussars. The first 2 clasps are for the initial bombardment of Alexandria and the subsequent battle at Tel el-Kebir. The next 10 are for service against the Mahdists in Sudan, and there are some minor rules to be aware of with these. The clasps for the battles at Abu Klea and Kirbikan could only ever be awarded in conjunction with the Nile 84-85 clasp, although the Nile clasp could be awarded without either battle clasp. Likewise, the battle clasp for Tofrek is only ever awarded alongside the clasp for Suakin 85, but one could be awarded the Suakin 85 clasp without the battle clasp. 720 medals with the class Suakin 1885 were awarded to a force from New South Wales. This is the first occasion that Australian units were sent overseas and served alongside Imperial troops. All those involved in the unsuccessful expedition to rescue Gordon in Khartoum received the class for Nile 1884-85. 392 medals with the class the Nile 1884-85 were awarded to Canadian voyageurs employed on the Nile, of whom 46 also received the Kirbikan clasp. This was the first overseas expedition by Canadians in the British Imperial conflict. A separate class, that of Gemeza 1888, was issued for the battle under Sir Francis Grenfell near Suakin in December of that year, and the last class for the Egypt Medal was for Toski 1889. The vast majority of these clasps were awarded to the reinvigorated Egyptian army, there only being 122 British troops present, including the previously mentioned John Beach. The medal could also be awarded without a clasp to personnel in the area at the time who did not take part in any of the expeditions or battles. All Egypt medal recipients received a second medal from the Khedive Tewfik Pasha, who decided to reward all British and Indian Army soldiers who took part in the campaign. Known as a Khedive's Bronze Star, it is a 5-pointed bronze star darkened by lacquer. There are 4 variations, 3 with the date of service and 1 undated. On the obverse, the centre of the star shows an image of the Sphinx with the pyramids in the background, all within a ring bearing the word Egypt and the appropriate date above the corresponding Arabic inscription. The reverse has a crowned monogram of Tewfik Pasha. The medal shown here was awarded to John Hartney of the 60th Royal Rifles. According to his service record, Hartney was quite a character. Born in Sussex in 1858, he joined the Rifles in 1878, being described as 5'5" tall and in poor physical development. He was soon in trouble. In 1880 he was punished 3 times for absenteeism, and 2 years later tried and confined twice, once for 336 days. In 1885 he was once again tried, twice for drunkenness. In 1887 he was tried by civilian court and again jailed, this time for assault. His medical records show that he was hospitalised once for severe deafness and twice for syphilis. Thank you for watching, and join me again next time as we stay on the African continent to take a look at a set of identical triplets.